2 parts Lego, 1 part clay, and all parts sci-fi fantasy horror. With origins in the Lego zombie apocalypse, the latest epic expression of this universe was the 90-minute feature film Gray Horizons, which takes place in the year 3044 of the Void War timeline. With such a time jump from the outbreak in the year 2107, there is a lot of lore to unpack for fans of the universe. In this 3-part series, I'm going to break down the most significant events of this apocalyptic timeline and describe some of the most important figures, species, and entities involved. Considering there are 2 more films in the works, know that there will be some spoilers. Consider yourself warned. In the year 2107, Earth was besieged by the affliction that would come to be known as Slag. It is difficult to overstate the horror of this global event. In the course of 1 year, nearly 85% of the human population was consumed by the ever-spreading mass of fleshy nightmare fuel. The few who survived had to live with the memory of their friends and family becoming grotesquely corrupted beyond recognition. In addition to those traumatic memories, the survivors faced a future that was bleak beyond imagination. Their home had become blanketed by a deadly, mindless mass of hell flesh. But who was responsible? Few would come to know the truth, but a small faction of civilians and TCF personnel uncovered part of the mystery. The infectious aspect of slag, an organic fluid called AK, or Aka fluid, was brought to Earth by an alien race known as the Exen. The origin of these reptilian beings is unknown, but it is clear that their advanced technology and biology allowed them to weaponize slag. The source of their power was a hybrid brain that gave the Exen control over the localized hive mind. But when that brain was destroyed, it shattered the minds of all the Exen connected to it. Slag was left to spread on its own as the Exen's reign on Earth came to a swift end, never to return. For now. At the time of the outbreak, the largest military organization was the Terror Counter Force, or TCF. This was an international military complex composed of 7 major nations, with the stated purpose of responding to global threats. Their initial response to the outbreak involved massive deployment of ground forces in an attempt to kill the alien entities on an individual basis. Their success was limited. Things spiraled out of control, particularly in major cities. Communications began to break down as military stations and society at large fell apart. Things got dark fast, and a number of military forces, including the TCF, switched to a sort of last resort strategy. The surviving military forces consolidated in tightly guarded strongholds and began heavily bombing the areas of highest slag concentration. This proved effective against sparsely corrupted areas, but highly ineffective in regards to densely corrupted areas. It would take decades and countless human lives before the reason for this was truly understood. As strongholds fell and communities of survivors grew thin, an unexpected flicker of hope emerged amidst the catastrophic destruction. Rumors of a powerful entity began circulating. It was described as a god by some, a spirit by others, and by some as a demon. But in time, its name was known everywhere. Kyo. Survivors began leaving their communities in search of Kyo and his wandering army. It was rumored that Kyo stood 5 meters tall, wielded a sword, and was covered with a white armor that was as hard as diamond. Survivors who encountered Kyo discovered something even stranger. Kyo bore no weapons, but used psychic abilities to decimate slag. He wore no armor, but his own white flesh seemed to be composed of indestructible and unknown material. He was far from human, and didn't even use speech to communicate. He guided his forces using telepathic communication and suggestion, and seemed to be capable of downloading information into humans. These downloads often served the purpose of helping humans design and build technologies that had never been seen before. By the year 2133, 26 years after the outbreak, Kyo's forces had amassed thousands of individuals. However, their fighting forces were still ill-equipped and disorganized. The initiative of several former TCF personnel paired with Kyo's ability to organize and direct, led to the establishment of the Unum Vires, Kyo's one force. Nicknamed the Fists of Kyo, the Unum Vires was equipped with leftover and refurbished TCF weapons and equipment. For the first time, significant fighting forces began liberating small areas independently of Kyo. This had mixed results. These smaller forces invariably encountered dense dens of slag, and the psychic fields produced by slag often compromised the soldiers. Kyo himself was highly effective at eradicating slag, but he needed more firepower to combat the spread of corruption. After years of keeping an eye out for natural leaders and effective fighters amongst his ranks, he handpicked 30 individuals for a unique opportunity. They would be augmented and cybernetically enhanced to combat slag, and would be injected with a questionable substance called dihexylate, which would protect their minds against the psychic attacks of slag. This team became known as the Archangels. The Archangels quickly became the stuff of legend. They were the tip of the spear in countless liberations. Their cybernetic enhancements, advanced beamer weaponry, and psychic protection allowed them to penetrate the deepest slag dens, destroying even giant slag with almost no casualties. This was a second flicker of hope for survivors who followed Kyo. It truly seemed that humans might reclaim their home for good. Given the effectiveness of the Archangels, the rest of Kyo's forces soon adapted a similar version of their technology for widespread use. This led to the first true Unum Vires regiment, and paved the way for all Unum Vires forces to come. But the rate of liberation was still painfully slow, considering most of the planet's populated areas were riddled with slag. It would take more than guns to truly eliminate the threat at hand. A decade or so after Kyo began his Great Crusade, an unprecedented phenomenon occurred within his liberated communities. Children born after the first year of liberation began to exhibit strange abilities during puberty. The people brought this to Kyo, who assured them it was a great gift to humanity. He took these children under his wing, giving them psychic downloads and teaching them how to wield these gifts. Over the next few decades, a wide variety of abilities rose to the surface. Some had a defensive nature, while others were more on the offensive side. Some abilities were neither, including powers such as telepathy, astral projection and vision, and memory scans. It is worth noting that only 5% of children born seemed to possess this psychic potential, and of that 5%, almost all of them were women. Males born with abilities were exceptionally rare, but when they did emerge, their abilities often developed early and with a greater potency than average. Interpreting Kyo's downloads and teachings, these psychics began to refer to themselves as channelers. By the year 2145, there were dozens of channelers who had reached adulthood. They began to use their abilities in combat against slag, and proved incredibly effective at protecting soldiers from psychic attack and assisting them with offensive capabilities. Those with neither defensive nor offensive capabilities dedicated themselves to learning and teaching these so-called astral arts, and the first Channeler Academy was established. This was the beginning of the Channeler's Ring, or Unum series. Humanity was growing in numbers and strength. Though Kyo's forces had remained nomadic for decades, they began to split and settle in liberated areas, using Kyo's gifted technology and power to reboot society much more quickly than would otherwise have been possible. It was the beginning of a new age. Alright, we're going to fast forward to the 24th century, around 200 years after the outbreak. Kyonic society is in full swing, and Kyo has become a religious figure and an object of worship and prayer. The Archangels have disappeared, but
it's a long story for another time.
But it's okay, because the Unum Vires and Unum series have fully integrated to become a slag-killing machine. The entire landmass of Morin had been liberated at last, but the daunting task of overseas liberation remains. This leads Kyo to produce his strangest but most powerful creation yet, the Revelibus. It was a large and remarkable device, seemingly produced from Kyo's own flesh and essence. The Revelibus served a singular and in some ways terrifying purpose. When a channeler of sufficient strength, will, and capability entered a Revelibus, they were transformed into an Animus, a bionic being akin to Kyo himself. Few were deemed worthy of this process, and in the end, only 7 Animus were created to serve as Kyo's apostles. Their duty? To cleanse the earth of slag, protect humanity, and to enact and proclaim the will of Kyo. Wielding extreme astral power and abilities, they were believed to be essentially immortal. They spread across the earth, leading battalions of Unimvirus troops to liberate multiple countries simultaneously. In a matter of years, Kyo had expanded his power 7-fold. Kionic societies grew and spread across the earth. Outside survivors were welcome to take refuge, but only if they abided by Kionic doctrine and practices. Now, there is a whole political reality and conflict that emerges from this in the later centuries of the timeline, but we're not going to touch on those in this particular lore series.
It's a long story for another time.
Much of Kionic philosophy involves 2 core concepts, the astral and the stream. We'll cover stream philosophy another time, but the astral refers to the astral realm. The astral realm overlays our own, but it is unbounded by 3-dimensional density. Beings that exist in the astral have near infinite powers of creation and expression, and interact with our own world in many ways. Some channelers are capable of communicating with these beings, and a few rare channelers are able to visit and explore the astral realm for brief periods of time. The human soul is understood to be astral in nature, pulling its energy and consciousness from that infinite realm. This astral connection is strongest in channelers, but all humans maintain a connection of some sort. It is the archetype of the spirit world, but it is very real, and its existence impacts humanity in more ways than you realize. Kyo is understood to have an extremely advanced understanding of the astral. His own technology draws power from the astral realm, and this allowed humanity to generate basically infinite free energy during the Great Crusade, greatly accelerating their recovery. One of the Kionic technologies with the most widespread use is the astral battery, which can hold an immense charge of pure astral energy. These batteries are used in beamers, which are able to penetrate slagic fields of any density. This was a massive game changer, as large slagic fields were known to completely disrupt and block traditional explosives, projectiles, and electronics. Other astral tech included the Psychus, which allowed defensive channelers to amplify their protective auras, Piercer tech, which allowed offensive channelers to focus their energy into penetrating beams, astral thrusters, and wormhole tech. The introduction of this technology essentially catapulted humanity into an advanced space-age state in no time. Slag is a strange creature. It typically corrupts and absorbs individuals completely, though in rare cases, the corrupted individual will retain some aspects of their genetics or personality. Usually, however, the being is fully integrated into the hive mind. The mechanics of the hive mind are still extremely mysterious. Slagic creatures don't necessarily move as if they have one mind, but they are absolutely connected in a significant way. Research in slagology has shown that there is something that directs or guides slag in a way that cannot be explained away by instinct or individual decision-making. The Kionic Slagology division dubbed this directing mind the Impulse. However, there is another name for the hive mind that is only shared in whispers: Krozox. You have to understand that once the Apostles came into play, Kionic protocol reigned supreme. In order to essentially maximize humanity's comeback, there were strict rules regarding social expectations, jobs, education, and the hierarchical structure of society as a whole. Kyo directed the Apostles the Apostles directed the Unum Series Grand Masters and Unum Vires Admirals, and so on. And because this society was built on Keonic technology, Keo and the Apostles controlled the flow of information. There was even a Keonic web that operated through astral tech. Some believed that Keo himself influenced the flow of information in this domain. All this to say, Keo and the Apostles maintained strict control over Keonic societies, and there were certain ideas that they went to great lengths to squash. One of them was the name Krozox. But why? In reality, Keo and the Apostles recognized that Krozox was an entity with origins in the astral realm. Keo seemed to know far more about this than the Apostles, but the information he shared was extremely limited. The Apostles knew that Krozox possessed some sort of sentient intelligence, and that it seemed to have an unending desire to consume consciousness. They also knew that Krozox had established contact with humans thousands of years before the outbreak. These humans called themselves Immunists, and they worshipped Slag as a god that would unify all things. The Immunists believed that Slag and Krozox had entered the world to end suffering by making all things one in this realm. Understandably, this was a religion that Keo and the Apostles could never tolerate. Therefore, anything resembling immonism was ruthlessly suppressed, and any language regarding Krozox as a sentient being was considered a strict taboo. According to the Unum series, consumption by Slag led to absorption of the body and the release of the soul. Death, in other words. At least, this is the belief that was publicly stated. Some, however, held opposing beliefs. I should mention here that Keonic doctrine declared reincarnation as a fact. Throughout the Crusade, and especially after the creation of the Apostles, humans were conditioned to believe that humanity was composed of a mass collective of souls that were recycled over and over again across the millennia. When a human died or was eaten by Slag, they would reincarnate shortly after somewhere on Earth. Whether this is the truth or not remains unclear. However, there are some who believe something much darker. Some believe that Slag actually destroys the soul, dissolving it completely. Others believe that Slag consumes souls, that when Slag absorbs you or corrupts you, your soul becomes trapped in some kind of hell or purgatory that is contained within the hive mind's mass consciousness, and that there is no escape from this realm. But it's just a theory. Maybe the truth will come out for those who follow this movie series. You may want to like and subscribe with notifications to follow along. We've only just scratched the surface on so many of these subjects. Keo's origins, the nature of the Exen, and the events of the Crusade as well as the astral realm are topics far too broad to go into detail into this video. Are there any of these topics in particular that interest you? The history of immonism, the biology of Slag, or the powers of Keo? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, just stay tuned for updates regarding the sequel Void War movie, The Hunger of Slag, which is in pre-production now. Thanks for watching.
Talon, issue the command before they regenerate!
Hey, Dane. 3C is infested.
I need another route.
Another route? What, you don't know your way around?
So,